Flock cameras continue to be a controversial issue. They're the license plate readers that capture information on every car that passes by.
Now, many local law enforcement agencies use the cameras and say they are effective in helping to fight crime, while opponents say they are an invasion of privacy. WECT's Rachel Holly listened to dozens of people as they raised concerns about those cameras to New Hanover County commissioners.
Rachel, what did the board take away from the comments they heard tonight?
Well, it appears to confirm what some commissioners had already told us, that a lot of people are concerned about how the cameras are being used and what data they're gathering. Commissioners did not vote tonight, but they assured the speakers that their messages were heard. The New Hanover County Commissioners' chamber was packed Monday night. Opponents of the controversial Flock cameras, who started the night with a rally outside the courthouse, stepped up to the microphone and told commissioners why they have problems with the license plate reading cameras.
The fact that the government is tracking your every movement and who you move with and having video of our children on a soccer field, it's creepy.
Mark Williams with DFlock ILM considers the cameras to be an unconstitutional invasion of privacy. He added that the public doesn't know who is looking in on them.
The county produced an audit showing this network was queried nearly 3 million times, with every searching agency's name blacked out. This week, even the company's CEO apologized. He said, "I'm sorry that the system has failed you."
Just last week, New Hanover County Sheriff Ed McMahon announced changes to the office's policy on use of the Flock cameras. That includes only keeping the data for 30 days instead of 90, and having monthly audits of the system's use instead of annual reviews. Commissioners responded to the speakers by pledging to learn more about the program and their concerns.
I don't believe that any of us were aware of what the contract had to say, and certainly what has happened with the cameras that are here. You've brought light, you've brought life to that with your testimony today and the words that you've said.
Commissioner Chairwoman Leanne Pierce says they welcome public comment about the Flock camera program. She said they hope to have answers to some of their own questions before talking about the program next month.